Okay, I'm going to go over the episode theme wheel, and this is a way to map out your storytelling for an episode so that way you don't have to use a script, but it still hits on the most important parts of an episode to make sure that it is hooky in the beginning, it's bingeable, the listener can relate, but also has action steps to take from there. And let's dive in. So, here is our mapped out episodes. So we're going to go through this a little bit. The first episode, we always suggest doing an anchor story, which is basically like your origin story that maps the same flow as this does, but for your the personal theme that your show is all about. So I'm going to go through it in that regards. So we always start with the hook. This is going to be what the listener will get out of this episode. And you want to make sure that you say this clear and concise within the first 30 seconds of the episode. And you can say something, you can always start with saying like, by the end of this episode, you'll know, or you'll get, or something like around those lines. Clear and concise. And if you can put numbers on it, the better. If you can quantify what they're going to get out of it, or how much time they're going to save, or things like that, that's going to also help around the clarity of really getting the buy-in for the listener to listen to the entire episode, which is really important when it comes to consumption rates, because that's going to help your podcast move forward with its stats and with people being able to find the episodes. So then after the hook start, we go into the before. This is where you're really giving context so that way the audience knows why your story matters. So this is the before, what happened. So if your show is all around building $1 million businesses or building $1 million brand, it's not going to be as interesting if you're like, I'm going to talk about the first time I made $1 million, or I'm going to share with you how I made $1 million, because we don't know the context of where you're coming from. It could be something around the lines of like, you were really close many times and then this is when it hit, or, or maybe you were just given $1 million. Like, you don't know. So you want to really map out that story. And so it's way more interesting if you were to say something like this, like, I was building my first $1 million. I invested a ton into myself and the team and mentors, and what happened was not what I thought it was. I ended up losing $1 million first. Then blah, blah, blah. Then all this stuff happens, right? It sets up the context. So that way the audience can be with you and have that relatability, like understanding the backstory. Now, where people do this wrong is that they actually make the before like the full episode. And a lot of times in marketing, if you are talking or highlighting too much about the before, say, I couldn't make $1 million, I was struggling, it didn't work, especially if you're talking about money, this is going to attract people that relate to what you're talking about, right? So we don't want you to attract people that can't afford your services and things like that. So that's just something to be aware of. That's why it's just one of these small little steps in the full wheel. You never want to do like a full episode around that unless there's a clear intention and strategy behind it. So then we go into the spark here. The spark is where it shows the turning point. It's the catalyst that sets the journey in motion. So this might be a thought or an action or something happened or a conversation. You want to set them up. And this is where you get to sort of start to like drip your authority into the story, explain a little bit who you are, that type of stuff. It all happens because they get to understand what was the spark that then moved you into the shift, which is the next part. So the shift is really that shift, right? Of going from the before to the now. So the shift highlights the evolution in mindset, action, or circumstance. So what happened there? And this is a great example that's just written on here. Instead of working on small commissions, Alex doubled down on creating a full online store, even though it meant risking his last $500. Like, there's the shift. The shift is the willingness. The shift is doing a new action. The shift is not doing what I did before, but doing something new. Then we go into the now. This is where you get to reward the listener with the payoff. So here's what happened. Here's what I'm experiencing. The biggest gift comes from the now, because when people are hanging out like in their social life, in their business life. They're usually hanging out with people that have a similar circumstance or similar circumstances and mindsets to them. So when you can actually go into the now and not only just say this is what I'm experiencing now, but also this is how I now think. This is how I now make decisions. This is how I now take new actions. That's going to actually be such a generous coaching moment within this whole episode theme and story. So you really want to dive into that one quite a bit and get detailed, and there will be such a payoff for your listeners when they get to hear that. Then that moves us into the invitation. The invitation is giving the audience a clear step in the right direction, a clear next step. Now, this sometimes can be a next step that they'll just take on their own, or sometimes it'll be a step that they might need your help with, like, click the link below. I'll give you the resources or things like that. This is where you can definitely tie in your freebies, your call to actions, but don't limit yourself by that. I always think of generosity first. So you want to really give them, what is that next step that's going to help them? And there might be a step 0 that happens before they click on the link, right? So you want to think about that and really understand what is the journey that they're on, and where are they? What do they need to get into action? And so when we are working through binge, the invitation is actually broken into 2 steps. It is it's the part where you're inspiring them to take action, to do something, and then E is actually empowering them to take action with you, right? So you can think of those 2 different pieces. Then it goes into the cliffhanger ending, and this is where you're really helping them make that next click where they say, okay, next, like, I need to watch the next thing. This is the binge factor. It's when you, like, basically you've already wrapped up the episode, right? From the hook all the way into the invitation, you're basically like, that could be the whole episode. This is the extra little thing that you get to do, which is the cliffhanger ending, where you get to say, like, okay, now you got that. You got this theme, you got the story, you got the steps. But what happens after that is usually XYZ. And that's what I'm going to go in. That's what I'm going to talk about in the next episode. So make sure you tune in or click to listen to the next one, right? So that's how you really tie this all together and create a bingeable series for your podcast. So something to note. I love how we get to use this wheel, because you can actually map it out for yourself before you do your episode, before you push record. You can totally map this out. And sometimes what I do is just put like one sentence by each of these main points. Or sometimes I'll even just draw something that will symbolize, to remind me of these different types of stories, right? So that's how you can play with this. Another cool thing is you can look at this as a clock. So if you want your episode to be, let's say 20 minutes, then you know that you can use this wheel to stop. So by the time you're at like halfway through the shift, you should be around 10 minutes through the episode, and then you can continue on from there. So that's a really great way to just make sure that you are staying on track, staying on time, and you can plug and play. So we just did it with the example of, like your origin story, but let's circle up here and see. So for instance, we have this, like the power of environment, the company you keep. So this is not necessarily, like an origin story, but you can still plug that theme into this wheel. So what is the hook, the start? What will the listener get out of it? And then you go into the before. You always want to tie a story into any of your podcast episodes. You can also tie it into, like, it doesn't have to be your story, right? It could be someone else's story. It could be a story that you've heard. That's other ways to kind of make the podcast robust, but definitely tie it into a storyline, right? So if we're talking about environment and how that shifts you, well, what is the before of you not being in, a thriving environment, things like that, and then going through the wheel from there. All right, so that's how you can map out a podcast episode without using a script. You could do it very quickly. You could just do one image on each of these. It should take no more than 5 to 10 minutes per episode. And it should be a really clear way for you to be able to get it all in a concise and clear amount of time. Of course, some episodes like to go longer or shorter, and really utilize this no matter the time and the length of your episode. This way you hit all of those pieces. And so we can also look at just the last thing that we can tie this into really is our binge framework, right? So B, we have the hook, so that would be its own. B is bring attention to the problem, right? I would be inserting an emotional story and inserting the solution that starts to happen in the spark and the shift. N is name that pain again. So that is also kind of like in the shift, right? So you can see even on this example, instead of working on small commissions, Alex doubled down on creating a full online store, even though it meant risking his last 500 bucks, right? That is the name the pain again moment. G is then give them a way forward. So that kind of goes into the N, and the now, and the invitation is give them a way forward. That's where you want to tell them, like, here's the actions you can take. This is what it can look like. Paint the vision of their future. And then and then E is empower them to take action, which is really still the invitation. And that's the call to action part on your end, where you can then bring them into your ecosystem and help them take that next step. Then we button it up with the cliffhanger ending. I hope that helps explain the best way to create high converting podcast episodes that are structured and clear, and have fun recording.